BBC Learning Zone programmes pause now for the story of what happened when a meteorite fell on a Lincolnshire field in 1795.
You may be wondering what an 18th century coaching inn has got to do with stones falling from the sky. Well, the George at Stamford, which was on the Great North Road between London and York in the late 1700s, actually would have featured very prominently in the toings and froings of the first recognised British meteorite, which fell in Yorkshire at a place called Wold, Cottage in 1795. Edward Topham, the owner of the land in Yorkshire, would have stopped here on his way to find out what had happened. In 1795, the British were at war with the French. The Napoleonic Wars had just started. And so when the residents of Wold Cottage heard a loud report, a loud bang, they naturally thought it was something to do with the war, and in fact they thought that the French were shelling the coast at Bridlington, 8 miles away. But the 56-pound object, the sort of football-sized rock, which landed in Topham's field, made a hole which would be equivalent of about approximately the equivalent of an artillery shell of that kind of power. The actual meteorite penetrated something like 20 inches, and it took John Shipley and 2 of his friends some hours to dig the stone out before they could carry it to the house. As an inveterate newspaperman, in fact he'd founded a paper called the World. He saw that he had a story on his hands, and he brought his stone back to London and put it on display in a place called the Gloucester Coffee House, which was near Piccadilly. Now, an important part about Mr. Topham in this story, that he was an extremely well-known personality in Regency London. He was a dandy. He was a man whose mistress was one of the foremost actresses of the day. The problem with Topham is that he was a magistrate, and he was very interested in the truth, and he wouldn't allow his men to embellish this story in any way. He asked them to give the testimonies that he used when he displayed the meteorite in an entirely factual form. So they were almost forced into giving it in a witness-like fashion. And in fact, he did swear these testimonies because there were a lot of people around at the time who doubted that stones could really fall from the sky. He went to great pains to explain to people that there were no volcanoes in the region of Yorkshire. The nearest volcano was in fact 800 miles away. And the reason why he did this is that there had been a stone that fell 100 years earlier in Italy, and people had associated the stone with an eruption of Vesuvius, which had occurred some 20 hours before. And Sir Joseph Banks, who was the president of the Royal Society at that time, commissioned a chemical analysis, and he was able to show that all the meteorites contained both metallic iron, and the metallic iron was contaminated by nickel. Now, not only is metallic iron very rare in terrestrial rocks, but iron with nickel associated with it is almost unheard of, because during terrestrial geological processes, the iron has settled out of the rocks into the Earth's core and taken the nickel with it. It's extremely fortunate for meteoritics that Edward Topham, in fact, lived in Yorkshire at all at this time. I've already said he was involved with a well-known actress of the time, Mrs. Wells. To say the very least, Mrs. Wells was unstable. She'd become a stalker of George III, among other of her escapades. He retired to Yorkshire almost to escape her. It was extremely fortunate for science that it fell on his land, because as a magistrate and the son of a judge, he was somebody who had an implicit and absolute belief in truth.